following is a paid program. The opinions expressed are not necessarily those of WNBU and Interbanks Media. Welcome to All Things Money with David Blain, a thoughtful and revealing discussion of actionable ideas and effective strategies to help you through the complex world of investing, taxes, and real estate. Now, with All Things Money, here's David Blain.
Hello and welcome to All Things Money. I'm your host, David Blain. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a great show lined up here on 94.1 FM, WNBU, and Cable TV 10 in New Bern. We're also have archived copies of the show on our website, www.dlblain.com. So some of you may be streaming it from there or downloaded it, listening to your iPod. We welcome you all, whether this week or listening in the future. We're going to talk a little bit about some tax topics today. And if we have time, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the markets. But we've got a lot of information on taxes. If you have comments or questions on the show, we've had some requests to talk about some of the new tax law proposals. Well, they're not tax law proposals, but when President Obama released his new budget a couple weeks ago in February, whenever they release the budget, there's sort of an implied legislation that goes along with this. So we've got quite a few requests to discuss what was in that budget and how it may or may not affect people in the future. So we want to spend a lot of time today talking about that. If you have comments or questions like people did for this tax topic, our phone number is 252-633-0107. Our email is allthingsmoney@dlblain.com. And as I mentioned already, you can also visit us on the web at www.dlblain.com. Okay, well, let's get right into it. In February 13th, President Obama released his budget for fiscal year 2013, and I'm going to talk about a few things. Number one, he said using a more realistic policy baseline rather than one based on current law. So his budget assumes that there will be some legislation enacted that he wants. So that's kind of a key. He throws out that reduce the deficit by $5.3 trillion from 2013 to 2022. That's nice. Whenever they talk about reducing the deficit by this amount or that amount, I mean, you can pretty much just ignore it. I mean, that's my opinion. You heard that in the healthcare. Oh, this is going to reduce the deficit by, $1 trillion, and then you got Pelosi saying, well, we need to pass it to find out what's in it. Just ignore the savings in these things. They're just projections. I mean, 2022, that's 10 years from now. You're going to go through at least 2 more presidents and how many Congresses. So I just kind of ignore the long-term cost savings projections because they just generally don't work out. Anyway, he proposes to raise taxes and pay for these deficit reduction by taxing the wealthiest 1 or 2% of Americans. One of the big things of this is people paying their fair share. Fair share is different to everyone. I hate to see, the tax code used as a social engineering tool and people's definition of fair share. He's been throwing out this, if you make more than $1 million, you should pay at least 30%. I mean, where do these numbers come from? How is that fair? Who determines what is fair? He also talks about simplifying the tax code and lowering tax rates, except for, of course, people making a large income. Reforming inefficient and unfair tax breaks, eliminating them for millionaires, making tax breaks beneficial for the middle class. And all these things, I'm just telling you what the proposal says, and then we're going to go through and analyze them and how they impact people, because it's the reasons for doing this are purely political and targeting specific groups of people. That's why we've ended up with this big mess of a tax code that we have now. Observing the Buffett rule and eliminating the alternative minimum tax, which, hey, I'm all for eliminating the AMT, but of course he replaces it with some other things. So where he claims that you're going to come up with savings or letting the Bush tax cuts expire for individuals making more than 200 or couples filing jointly making more than 250, returning the estate tax to the 2009 parameters. He wants to reduce the value of itemized deductions for 28% taxpayers. Wants to tax carried interest of hedge fund managers, private equity partners, and managers of partnerships as ordinary income. You know, that's not, I don't really have a problem with that. Being in the investment industry, and we have been involved in a number of private partnerships, there should be a distinction between capital earned as the manager of an enterprise, of a private equity thing, and the capital involved in, you know, that they put into the deal. Eliminating special depreciation for corporate jets, okay, eliminating oil and gas tax preferences, you know, that once again targeting big oil. Anyway, let's go through these. This is kind of where it gets important. No matter how much money you make, we want to talk about what exactly these mean so that you know what's on the table. The reality is this year, in the election year, probably none of this has come to pass, but if you're planning for the future, in the income arena, the estate arena, you need to know what's on the table, because especially if President Obama is reelected, you may see some of these things come to pass. So, number one, sunsetting the Bush tax cuts for upper income taxpayers. And what this means is that individuals who have AGI over 200,000 or couples over 250,000, they would reinstate the limitation on itemized deductions. That means that above those amounts, 3% of the itemized deduction would be reduced. The limit would be 80%. This was an old rule that expired. It was a rule for many years, and then it expires. So people in the upper income brackets would begin to lose part of their itemized deductions. Now, there's another provision in here that also relates to itemized deductions, really targeting the itemized deductions for higher income taxpayers. Let's hold that thought. We'll come back to that. The second thing is to reinstate the personal exemption phase out. Once again, previous tax law was that personal exemptions for higher taxpayers faded out, and they didn't get an exemption for themselves. So we're talking about, you know, fair share. You know, everyone, if there's a personal exemption, why doesn't everyone get it? He proposes to reinstate the 36 and 39.6% tax bracket. So bring back those two highest tax brackets. The highest one, you know, do you ever wonder how they came up with 39.6% tax bracket? I mean, why they couldn't just round it to 40 or 39? It just, sometimes they do these things that just make absolutely no sense. Okay, well, we're coming up on our first break. We're going to be talking about tax policy. Once again, when we come back, some of the proposals that President Obama has put on the table. So, for All Things Money, I'm your host, David Blain. We'll be right back after a few short messages from our sponsors.